Poor girl finds wallet in the park and returns it. The next day, a millionaire invites her. Ever wondered how a single, unexpected discovery can turn someone's life upside down? In our story, a struggling girl stumbles upon a wallet stuffed with cash in her neighborhood park and makes a choice that ultimately changes her future forever. She decides to do the right thing, return it to its owner. But little does she know that one act of honesty will open the door to an extravagant mansion, uncover hidden family secrets, and offer her and her child a glimpse of a life they never thought possible. Curious to find out how she navigates the millionaire's world, tackles unexpected challenges, and stands up for the values she believes in. Stick around for the full story to see how trust, compassion, and courage can transform even the most impossible situations. And before diving in, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. Nina Alvarez wiped the last speck of dust from the ornate mirror in the hallway of the modest home she was cleaning, her reflection revealing the exhaustion in her own eyes. She worked as a cleaner for families across the city, tackling tasks that ranged from washing floors to scrubbing stubborn kitchen grime. The gray uniform she wore felt like a second skin, faded from too many washes and worn at the edges from her constant movement. With a tired sigh, she gathered her supplies, making sure every surface sparkled the way her employers expected. It was late afternoon by the time she stepped outside, the sun dipping low behind the buildings, bathing the neighborhood in an amber glow. For most people, this golden hour might be a time of beauty and rest, but for Nina, it signaled the end of one labor-intensive day and the start of her second shift as a mother to her 9-year-old daughter, Kara. Kara was the light in Nina's life, a bright spark who seemed to shine even in the darkest moments. She had her father's dark eyes and a cascade of curly brown hair that rarely stayed neatly combed, no matter how many times Nina tried to tie it up. They lived together in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment that Nina managed to keep as neat as possible, though she often felt guilty that she had so little time to spend there. Her schedule as a house cleaner left her perpetually fatigued. The building itself showed signs of wear, with peeling paint in the hallways and a front door lock that occasionally stuck. Yet within those walls, Nina and Kara found their refuge from the demands of everyday life. It had been just the two of them since Kara was a toddler. Nina's husband, Trevor, had walked out unexpectedly one afternoon, vanishing without explanation or apparent remorse. In his absence, Nina became both breadwinner and caregiver. There were days she felt the ache of loneliness or the sting of resentment, but mostly she just felt determined. She had to keep going for Kara's sake. If she allowed herself a moment to dwell on the unfairness of it all, she feared she might collapse under the weight. The only thing that kept her pressing forward was her love for her daughter, and the belief that somehow, someday, their lives could be better. On this particular day, Nina was especially worn out. She had tackled 2 cleaning jobs back-to-back and was returning home later than usual. She hoped Kara hadn't worried. It was a routine they knew all too well. Kara would play in the park near their apartment for an hour after school, then come home to do her homework at the small kitchen table. Nina usually arrived before sunset. But today, the sun was slipping quickly toward the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and violet. Nina clutched her worn handbag tighter against her side, feeling a pang of guilt for being late yet again. She quickened her pace, wishing she could fly home to greet her child with a hug and something more than a tired smile. When Nina arrived at their apartment door, she discovered it slightly ajar, which made her heart skip a beat. Had Kara come home and forgotten to close it properly? The hallway light flickered above, compounding her anxiety. She gently pushed the door open, calling Kara's name softly. A wave of relief washed over her when she spotted Kara sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, her backpack unzipped beside her. The girl looked up with an expression so excited that it momentarily chased away Nina's exhaustion. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." Kara's eyes shone with a curious mix of triumph and uncertainty. In her small hands, she clutched a large brown leather wallet that looked completely out of place in their humble home. Nina's breath caught in her throat as she registered the item in Kara's grasp. The wallet was obviously expensive, made of thick, high-quality leather with a polished brass clasp. Despite her exhaustion, Nina's mind immediately whirred with questions and concerns. How on earth had Kara ended up with something that looked so luxurious? And if it was full of money, as Nina's quick glance suggested, what did that mean for them? Under normal circumstances, a windfall of cash could pay a late electricity bill, put groceries in their nearly empty fridge, or even cover a decent set of new school clothes for Kara. Those thoughts, unbidden, rose in Nina's mind before she firmly reminded herself of what was right. "Kara," Nina said cautiously, stepping deeper into the apartment and laying her handbag on the scuffed coffee table. "Where did you get that?" The young girl hesitated for a moment, as if rehearsing the story in her head. Then she launched into an explanation so earnest, Nina couldn't help but trust every word. Kara had been playing in the park, the same park she frequented almost every afternoon. She liked to sit on one particular bench near the old oak tree, using her imagination to weave grand stories about magical worlds and heroes on quests, an escape from the constant hustle of their real life. Earlier that day, Kara had spotted the wallet on the ground near the bench. At first she thought someone nearby might have dropped it and would return for it, so she waited for nearly half an hour. No one came to claim it. Curious, she peeked inside to find it stuffed with more bills than she had ever seen. Her first impulse was excitement, maybe enough money to help her mom, to make life easier. But a deeper voice, the voice of her conscience nurtured by Nina's teachings, urged her to do the right thing. Kara realized that the wallet must have an owner who was likely frantic with worry about losing it. She didn't know how to find that person immediately, so she tucked the wallet in her backpack, raced home, and waited for Nina's guidance. Now, as mother and daughter sat on their worn-out living room couch, the wallet lay open on the coffee table. There was an ID card inside, identifying the owner as someone named Grant Richardson. Neither Nina nor Kara recognized the name. There were several credit cards as well, each carefully slotted, and a driver's license that listed an address in one of the wealthier areas of the city. Even the photograph on the license seemed to suggest a man of distinguished style, about 40 or so, with neatly combed silver-streaked hair. Kara bit her lip nervously. "What should we do, Mom?" She asked this question even though she likely knew the answer. Nina lifted her gaze from the wallet to her daughter. The lines of fatigue on Nina's face softened when she looked at Kara, seeing the best of herself reflected in her daughter's sincere brown eyes. Returning the wallet was the only choice that aligned with the principles Nina had tried to uphold in her small household. Morality was a cornerstone she hoped Kara would carry throughout life. "Well," Nina began, the weight of her own worries pressing on her heart, "we're going to return it, honey. First thing tomorrow morning, we'll try to find this Mr. Richardson." She paused, swallowing hard. The decision was right, but it also meant giving up on a chance for quick relief. Keeping it would be wrong, and we aren't going to let ourselves be that kind of people. Do you understand? Kara nodded solemnly, looking both relieved and a little sad. They were turning away from what might be a small fortune, but it was the right thing to do. They carefully tucked the wallet into a kitchen drawer, and Nina's mind whirled with the implications of what might happen next. Would this Grant Richardson be furious that someone had held onto his wallet overnight? Would he accuse them of theft despite their good intentions? All these anxieties roiled beneath the surface as she turned to help Kara prepare a simple meal. Their cupboards were nearly bare, just enough for a modest dinner of scrambled eggs and toast. They ate mostly in silence, Nina too worried to force small talk, while Kara seemed lost in her thoughts. That night, after Kara had fallen asleep, Nina couldn't rest. She found herself standing by the small window, staring into the dark cityscape, the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the pavement below. She wondered about the mysterious man named Grant Richardson, about his life of apparent wealth, and how he would react to their honesty. She wondered if returning the wallet might trigger events beyond her control. Morning arrived too soon, and Nina's nerves felt taut as she contemplated the day's task. Though she had a cleaning job scheduled, she resolved to postpone it for a few hours. Returning the wallet was paramount. She couldn't focus on scrubbing floors when this moral obligation weighed on her conscience. As she rummaged through her sparse wardrobe for something slightly more presentable than her work uniform, Kara hovered nearby, lacing up her worn sneakers. "Are you scared?" Kara asked in a small voice. Nina paused. The truth was, yes, she was afraid, afraid of venturing into a part of town she rarely visited, afraid of how a wealthy stranger might receive them, and still a flicker of worry about the what-ifs. But Nina couldn't show that fear to Kara, not when she needed to set an example of strength and composure. "A little," Nina admitted, forcing a reassuring smile. "But we're doing the right thing. That matters more than anything else." They left the apartment building and caught a bus to the address listed on Grant Richardson's ID. As they traveled, the scenery gradually shifted from rundown storefronts and cramped apartment complexes to tree-lined avenues and sprawling houses. Kara's eyes widened as grand homes appeared outside the window, manicured lawns, wrought iron gates, and elaborate fountains that gleamed in the early sun. Nina felt like an intruder just passing by, wondering if she'd ever set foot in such places under normal circumstances. When they finally reached the designated street, Nina's breath caught. The houses here were not merely large, they were vast estates, each separated by tall hedges or decorative fences. Following the numbers, they eventually found themselves standing before a towering gate leading to a mansion that seemed plucked from a film set. An elegant sign near the gate read, "Richardson Estate," and the paved driveway beyond hinted at manicured gardens and luxurious automobiles. Nina pressed the intercom button at the gate, her heart thrumming. For a moment, she contemplated turning around, but one glance at Kara's earnest face reminded her they had come too far to back out now. After a tense silence, a clipped woman's voice came through the speaker. "Yes, may I help you?" Nina cleared her throat. "My name is Nina Alvarez. I'm here because my daughter found Mr. Grant Richardson's wallet in the park yesterday. We're returning it." She tried to keep her tone confident, despite feeling entirely out of place. Kara fidgeted at Nina's side, holding the wallet carefully in a small plastic bag they had brought for protection. The intercom crackled again, and the voice commanded, "Please wait." Moments later, the heavy iron gates groaned open, revealing a winding driveway flanked by rose bushes. Nina took a step forward, holding Kara's hand as they traversed the immaculate grounds. The house itself loomed at the end, a 3-story mansion with white columns, large bay windows, and an imposing oak door. A sharply dressed woman stood on the threshold to greet them, her posture erect and her gaze appraising. She introduced herself as Ingrid, the estate's housekeeper. "Mr. Richardson is in his study," Ingrid said, offering a polite if somewhat guarded smile. "If you'll follow me." Nina and Kara exchanged glances before stepping into a foyer so grand that they both paused in awe. Marble floors shone under an ornate chandelier, and portraits in gilded frames lined the walls. It was a far cry from the cramped hallways Nina was used to cleaning. She felt uneasy, both in the grandeur of the space and under the watchful eye of Ingrid, who seemed to size them up with every step. Yet Nina steeled herself. She was here to do the right thing, not to covet or feel inferior. Clutching Kara's hand, she prepared to meet the man whose wallet they had so dutifully returned. Ingrid led them through a corridor that opened into a spacious study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A large window overlooked a stunning garden, where hedges were trimmed into graceful shapes and flower beds exploded with color. Behind an imposing wooden desk sat Grant Richardson, a man who appeared a little older than the photo on his license, as if weighed down by unseen burdens. His suit jacket hung on a nearby coat rack, leaving him in a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. Flecks of gray dusted his hair at the temples, and faint lines around his eyes betrayed more than just age. They hinted at sorrow. Nina felt Kara's hand tighten around hers as they both approached. Grant looked up from a file he had been reading, and his eyes landed on the plastic bag containing his wallet. A flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly replaced by reserved politeness. "You must be Nina, and this young lady must be the one who found my wallet," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Nina noticed that while he spoke calmly, there was a lingering tension in his posture, as though a deep restlessness had set roots in his bones. Nina took a small step forward, her heart thudding. "Yes, sir, Kara found your wallet at the park. We wanted to return it as soon as possible." She motioned for Kara to come closer, and the girl extended the plastic bag. For a moment, Nina could see the flicker of nerves in her daughter's face. Despite her outward bravado, Kara was just a child in a massive estate, facing a man who inhabited a very different world. Grant stood and walked around the desk. As he took the wallet from Kara, he offered a ghost of a smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "There was quite a bit of money in here, and I feared it was gone for good. It's not every day you encounter someone with such honesty." His gaze shifted to Nina, and she noted the gratitude in his expression. Yet there was something else, a guarded wariness, as if life had taught him to suspect that kindness might come with a catch. At that moment, Ingrid stepped forward from her post near the door, clearing her throat discreetly. "Shall I bring refreshments?" she asked, careful not to interrupt the palpable tension. Grant nodded, then turned his attention back to Nina and Kara. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to two comfortable chairs near a low mahogany table. "I'd like to hear more about how you discovered the wallet, and you should let me thank you properly." Nina and Kara exchanged uncertain glances. They hadn't expected such hospitality. They were simply here to do the right thing and then go back to their everyday lives. Still, they obeyed, taking seats in front of the desk. The chairs felt plush, unfamiliar against Nina's work-weary back. For a few moments, Grant asked them about their day, about which park bench Kara had been sitting on, and how she decided to keep the wallet safe. Each detail revealed a hint more of Kara's good-hearted nature. Nina felt a swell of pride, but she also remembered the electricity bill that was overdue, the meager groceries at home, and how the money in Grant's wallet might have solved many of their problems. Yet she hadn't wavered. She had taught her daughter to do what was right, even when it hurt. As they spoke, Ingrid quietly returned with tea and pastries, setting them on the table. The aroma of Earl Grey drifted through the study, a subtle reminder that they were far from Nina's kitchen, where a simple kettle and leftover bread often sufficed. Grant thanked Ingrid and handed a cup to Kara with a gentleness that belied his initial reserve. His gaze lingered on Kara's face for a second longer than expected, as though she reminded him of something or someone. It was a moment that passed quickly but left Nina wondering what sadness he carried in that refined, quiet manner. The conversation meandered into simpler territory. Grant asked Kara about her school, her favorite subjects, and whether she liked to draw or read. Kara, naturally guarded around strangers, became more at ease under his gentle questioning. She described her love for stories, particularly those about princesses who were brave rather than simply beautiful, and about adventurers who overcame impossible odds. Nina listened, sipping tea she would normally have found comforting, if not for the swirl of uncertainties in her mind. Grant glanced between mother and daughter, noting their close bond. Nina noticed his expression shift from politeness to something more solemn, as if reminded of memories he wasn't ready to share. It was there in the way his eyes clouded and the slight tightening of his jaw. But just as quickly he masked it with a courteous smile. "So," he said carefully, placing his cup down on the table, "I'd like to do more than just say thank you. The honesty you've shown isn't something I take lightly." Nina opened her mouth to politely decline any reward, but Grant held up his hand. "Hear me out. I'm not offering money, or not just money. I'd like you both to come back here soon. Maybe let Kara see the garden. It's large and in need of some laughter." Nina blinked. She wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. An invitation, just like that? Her life didn't usually involve second visits to mansions or cordial afternoon teas with wealthy men. Part of her worried this was a trick, or that there might be strings attached. Yet another part of her recognized a genuine warmth in Grant's voice. Perhaps he was lonely. It wasn't her place to assume. Before Nina could formulate a response, Kara brightened visibly. "The garden looked really pretty through the window," the girl said, excitement bubbling in her tone. "I'd love to see more of it." The innocence in her eagerness melted Nina's reservations. In truth, she had no reason to suspect ill intentions. Grant didn't seem to exude arrogance or malice. Instead, he appeared deeply grateful, even intrigued by the pair who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Nina nodded slowly, still cautious. "We'd be happy to visit," she replied. "But we don't want to impose." Grant waved away the concern. "It's no imposition. In fact, Ingrid will be pleased to have someone else appreciate her hard work in maintaining the grounds." He cast a gentle smile in Kara's direction. "It's settled then. Maybe later this week if you're free?" And so, a simple act of returning a wallet evolved into a budding acquaintance that neither Nina nor Grant could fully comprehend yet. Nina stood, preparing to leave. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably an overdue reminder from her cleaning job. Time was running short. As they walked back toward the foyer, Grant escorted them, hands in his pockets, maintaining a respectful distance. Kara chatted animatedly, already imagining all the secret corners of the garden she might explore. Nina, however, couldn't help but wonder about the sorrow she had glimpsed in Grant's eyes. There was more to this invitation than mere gratitude, she sensed. Perhaps there was something about Kara that reminded him of a lost daughter, or a memory he still couldn't release. She didn't pry, though. She was simply relieved they had returned the wallet, kept their integrity intact, and might have made a new friend, or at least a newfound connection in a world they never thought they'd enter. As Nina and Kara stepped out into the sunshine, the mansion's iron gates creaked shut behind them. Nina clutched the small slip of paper on which Grant had written his personal number, along with Ingrid's direct line. The gesture felt surreal. She'd never imagined being given a phone number for someone so far removed from her sphere of life. The ride back home was spent partly in conversation with Kara about the fancy study, the plush chairs, and Ingrid's polite but guarded demeanor. Kara was enthralled. For her, the morning had been an adventure plucked straight from the pages of a fairy tale. Nina, on the other hand, wrestled with a swirl of conflicted emotions: relief, curiosity, gratitude, and a hint of apprehension about this new door that had opened. Nina couldn't afford to lose another day's wages, so as soon as they returned to their neighborhood, she dropped Kara off at a neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Lee, an older woman who often babysat Kara in emergency situations, welcomed the girl with a smile, offering warm dumplings from the stovetop. Nina thanked her hurriedly, then rushed off to her cleaning job. Although her mind was on Grant's invitation, she had to stay focused to complete her tasks on time. Hours later, she arrived home to find Kara buzzing with excitement, telling Mrs. Lee all about the mansion and the kind man who owned it. That evening, after tucking Kara into bed, Nina finally allowed herself a moment to reflect. Their encounter with Grant Richardson had felt like stepping onto a different planet, one where wealth smoothed out life's edges. Nina couldn't help imagining what it might be like to never worry about rent or groceries. Yet she also sensed that enormous wealth didn't shield Grant from sorrow. The quiet sadness in his eyes hinted at struggles that money alone couldn't remedy. In a way, it made him more human in her eyes, despite the imposing mansion and the lavish surroundings. Over the next couple of days, Nina waited to see if Grant would follow up on his invitation. She was too shy to call him directly, uncertain of etiquette in such matters. At the same time, she also needed to prepare herself for the possibility that he'd simply made a polite offer in the moment and might forget about them soon after. Perhaps her doubt was rooted in her own history of being let down, first by Trevor, who had vanished without explanation, and then by a society that often overlooked individuals living paycheck to paycheck. Then, on a gray morning when the sky hung heavy with clouds threatening rain, Nina's phone chimed with a text message. It was from Ingrid, the housekeeper. "Mr. Richardson wishes to invite you and Kara for afternoon tea in the garden tomorrow if it's convenient." Nina's heart skipped a beat, a warm thrill coursing through her. She quickly confirmed, making sure it fit around her work schedule. Kara, upon hearing the news, clapped her hands in excitement. "I can't wait to see the garden," she exclaimed. Nina mustered a small smile, choosing to keep her deeper thoughts about the underlying motives locked away for now. She had been cautious her entire life, yet something in her soul suggested that going back was the right decision, for Kara's happiness, if nothing else. That afternoon, Nina finished her assignments early. She and Kara boarded a bus that took them again to the gates of the Richardson estate. This time, the gates swung open more swiftly, and Ingrid greeted them with less hesitation. Nina noticed the faintest hint of warmth in the housekeeper's previously reserved demeanor. It was as though their act of honesty, combined with Grant's sincere gratitude, had begun to break down walls. Ingrid led them through a side path into the estate's garden, a sprawling expanse of greenery, roses of every color, neatly trimmed hedges, and small stone paths curving around fountains adorned with intricate sculptures. In the distance, birds chirped from the branches of old oak trees. Kara's face lit up at the sight of the garden. She darted across the lawn with her mother's permission, stopping by clusters of flowers to inhale their fragrance or to run her fingers over the petals. Nina followed, her steps cautious, feeling momentarily like an intruder in this lavish space. Yet the air was welcoming, filled with the soft rustle of leaves, the gurgle of water flowing from a fountain, and a mellow sunlight that broke through the clouds. Eventually, they reached a small patio where a wrought iron table had been set with delicate teacups and a plate of pastries. Grant was already seated, flipping through a business magazine. He looked up as they approached, a genuine smile curving his lips. "Good afternoon, Nina." "Kara," he greeted, standing up in a gentlemanly fashion. Nina noticed a gentler spark in his eyes than before, as though he'd found a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in years. She returned the greeting politely, and Kara, displaying the manners Nina had taught her, offered a small curtsy that made Grant chuckle in delight. As Ingrid poured tea for them, Nina settled into one of the chairs. "You have a beautiful garden, Mr. Richardson," she said, hoping a compliment would ease the swirl of emotions in her chest. Grant shook his head lightly. "Please call me Grant," he insisted. Then he gestured to the vibrant blooms all around them. "Thank you. My wife used to love gardening. She oversaw much of the landscaping design here. After..." He trailed off, a flicker of regret passing over his features. "Well, after she left, I didn't have the heart to change it." Nina felt a pang of sympathy. So he'd been abandoned too, in a way. She didn't press for details, sensing his reluctance to delve into painful memories. Instead, she focused on more cheerful topics, asking which flowers blossomed in which season. Kara chimed in with questions about whether he had a pond or a greenhouse. Grant answered each query patiently, seeming oddly at peace in the presence of a child who had an insatiable curiosity for the wonders of the estate. Meanwhile, Ingrid remained in the background, attentive yet discreet. After a while, she excused herself, mumbling something about checking on the rest of the house. As Nina sipped her tea, she couldn't help feeling that Ingrid's departure was intentional, an unspoken invitation for Grant and Nina to speak more freely. She found herself wondering if Ingrid played a role more akin to caretaker than simple employee, watching over Grant's emotional well-being as much as the physical estate. The conversation wandered to Kara's interests again, and Nina eventually shared small details about their own lives. She talked about being a cleaner, about her typical workday, and how she balanced that schedule with single motherhood. Grant listened intently, nodding with empathy. "That's a lot to shoulder," he remarked softly. Nina shrugged, her face heating from the attention. "I manage because I have to. Kara is my priority. There's no choice but to keep going." A momentary silence followed, broken by Kara chasing a butterfly that fluttered near the table. Grant watched her with an expression Nina recognized, a longing rooted in love, tinged with heartbreak. He exhaled and the corners of his mouth turned down ever so slightly. They finished their tea and Grant offered to give Kara a brief tour of one of the garden's special paths. Nina accompanied them, observing how Grant's demeanor relaxed in Kara's presence. The child's innocence and eagerness seemed to diffuse the tension that otherwise haunted him. At one point, they reached a small wooden bridge over a lily pond. Lily pads floated on the water's surface, and a statue of a graceful angel stood at the edge, partially hidden by reeds. Kara gazed at it, entranced. "It's beautiful," she whispered, leaning on the railing to get a closer look. Grant's lips tightened slightly, but he nodded. "It was my daughter's favorite spot," he murmured, almost to himself. Nina's heart clenched at the quiet confession, another sign that sorrow ran deep in this mansion. After the tour, they circled back to the patio. Grant's phone rang and he excused himself to answer it, leaving Nina and Kara momentarily alone. Nina noticed Ingrid hovering at the edge of the lawn, beckoning subtly for her attention. Confused, Nina handed Kara a small cookie to keep her busy, then walked over to Ingrid. "Is something wrong?" Nina asked, noticing the cautious look on the housekeeper's face. Ingrid hesitated, glancing at Grant to ensure he was out of earshot. "Not exactly," she began quietly. "But I think you should be aware of someone else who lives here, or rather, someone who used to live here often. Mr. Richardson's sister, Sylvia." Nina tilted her head. "His sister?" Ingrid nodded, lowering her voice. "She is part of the family business. After Mr. Richardson's daughter passed away, Sylvia took on more responsibilities. She's been watching him closely ever since. Ingrid trailed off, her own gaze troubled. Nina frowned, not sure what to make of this cryptic warning. So, is she dangerous? The housekeeper sighed. Not physically, no, but she's very protective of her influence. She doesn't like new people around him, especially not people who might change how he sees his grief or how he manages the estate. I just wanted to warn you that if Sylvia sees your presence as a risk, she may try to push you away. A mixture of disbelief and apprehension slid through Nina's thoughts. She thanked Ingrid for the heads up, though she had no idea how to handle such a possibility. She felt out of her depth. After all, Nina was just a cleaner. She had never crossed paths with high-powered family intrigues. Still, she felt a growing protectiveness over Kara, and even a sense of responsibility toward Grant. Not that she owed him anything beyond friendship, but if there was a chance she could offer kindness to someone who was as wounded as she'd once been, she wanted to do so without the looming threat of an overbearing sister interfering. When Grant returned, Ingrid slipped away, leaving Nina to plaster on a small smile. "Everything okay?" she asked, gesturing to the phone. He nodded, forcing a neutral expression. "Work issues. They never end." Nina recognized the coded language. He was telling her politely that there was trouble in his business or personal affairs, but not wanting to delve into details. She didn't press. They'd all had enough personal revelations for one day. Not long after, Nina decided it was time to go. Kara whined playfully, reluctant to leave the garden, but Nina promised her they might come back if Grant allowed it. Grant replied in earnest that they were welcome any time, a response that filled Nina with gratitude and, yes, an undercurrent of concern. Because behind that kindness lingered heartbreak, and a complicated web of family dynamics Nina sensed was about to tangle her more deeply than she'd ever expected. Nina's concerns multiplied faster than she could contain them when she arrived home later that evening. The sky had darkened and the humidity pressed down on the city streets. Inside their apartment, Nina could feel an unsettling air, as though something or someone had disturbed the fragile peace she and Kara shared. She flicked on a lamp, noticing the flickering bulb overhead, and realized she'd have to replace it soon. Another small expense to add to her mental list. Kara, yawning, headed to the cramped bedroom to change into pajamas. Nina busied herself tidying the living room. That's when she heard a sharp knock at the door, sending her heart racing. Rarely did anyone visit them this late. "Mom?" Kara peered around the corner, looking anxious. "Go to your room, sweetheart," Nina instructed, trying to sound calm. She approached the door, bracing herself for anything. A neighbor complaining about noise, a landlord chasing rent, or something worse. When she opened the door, there stood a face she had never wanted to see again. Trevor Morales, her long-gone husband, Kara's absentee father. His hair was slicked back and he wore a shirt that looked more expensive than anything he'd owned when they were together. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, though his eyes had the same restless glint Nina remembered all too well. Shock rooted Nina to the spot for a few seconds. "Trevor?" she finally croaked, incredulity fueling the swirl of anger and anxiety inside her. "What? Why are you here?" Trevor shoved a hand casually into his pocket, surveying the room behind her with a practiced air. "Can't a father check on his family?" he drawled, raising a brow. Nina bristled at the word family, a concept he had abandoned years ago. "You have no right," she snapped, blocking his entrance. "You left us, remember?" He lifted his free hand in mock surrender. "Okay, sure, I disappeared for a while," he conceded, as if talking about a minor mishap. "But I heard through the grapevine you've been living in new circumstances. Something about a wealthy benefactor? A mansion?" His voice turned patronizing, a tone that made Nina's skin crawl. Her mind flashed to the conversation with Grant, the invitations, the possibility that Trevor had somehow discovered her visits to the Richardson estate. She had no idea how. Maybe he'd run into neighbors or mutual acquaintances. Her pulse quickened. "We have no benefactor," Nina retorted, trying to keep her voice level but failing. "I'm working 2 jobs. Kara's in school. That's our life, nothing more." Trevor let out a low, mocking laugh. "Don't lie, Nina. Word on the street says you've made connections in high places. If you found a golden ticket, maybe you should share a piece of it with the father of your child." After all, I do have parental rights. Nina felt anger burn hot in her chest. He was so transparent, so utterly selfish. "Stay away from us, Trevor," she seethed. "I've built a life without you, and I don't need you showing up and messing everything up for Kara." He shrugged, unruffled. "We'll see about that. If your rich friend wants to keep you around, maybe he'll be open to negotiations." The threat in his words was implicit: cause trouble or extort money. Nina's hands trembled as she forced herself to remain calm. "You're not coming near Kara until I say so," she managed. Trevor gave her a final sneer before turning on his heel and walking off into the dimly lit corridor. Nina slammed the door shut, leaning against it as her knees threatened to buckle. She had feared his return for years, but she hadn't expected it would come at such a moment, when the mere rumor of wealth around her could stir his opportunistic nature. After Trevor's sudden reappearance, Nina found herself in a state of perpetual unease. Sleep was elusive, and every unexpected noise at the door set her nerves on edge. She tried to keep the truth about Trevor's visit from Kara, not wanting to burden the child with adult fears. Yet Kara, perceptive as ever, knew something had changed. She'd ask, "Mom, is everything okay?" whenever she found Nina staring vacantly at the wall or checking the door locks for the third time in an evening. Nina's only comfort was that Trevor hadn't turned up again, at least not yet. Work offered a temporary distraction, though Nina was often too preoccupied to focus fully. She found herself thinking about Grant, the sincerity in his eyes when he thanked Kara, the longing in his voice when he mentioned his daughter's favorite garden spot. Could she confide in him about Trevor's intrusion? Would that be overstepping boundaries? They weren't exactly old friends, nor had they established any formal relationship beyond kindness and gratitude. Despite her doubts, Nina accepted another invitation to the Richardson estate a few days later, this time for a casual lunch in the garden. Kara bubbled with excitement, untroubled by the storm clouds forming in Nina's mind. Upon arriving, they noticed subtle changes. Ingrid greeted them more warmly, and the staff seemed less formal. It felt almost like they were becoming part of the household's routine, something Nina wasn't entirely certain was a good idea, yet it was undeniably comforting. They found Grant waiting in the garden, now accompanied by a woman Nina hadn't met before. Dressed in a tailored pantsuit, with meticulously styled dark hair, the woman stood with the poise of someone used to commanding attention. Her narrow gaze raked over Nina and Kara in a way that made Nina instinctively want to draw Kara close. Grant gave a tight smile, gesturing to the newcomer. "Nina, Kara, this is my sister, Sylvia Richardson." Nina forced a polite smile. "Nice to meet you," she said softly. Sylvia inclined her head but said nothing at first. She studied Kara, who offered a shy wave, then turned her attention to Nina. "Grant's told me quite a bit," Sylvia said, her tone clipped. "You found his wallet and returned it. That's commendable." Nina sensed the unspoken skepticism. She forced another smile, nodding in acknowledgement. Grant suggested they all sit, but Kara spotted a butterfly near the roses and scampered off to chase it. Nina decided to follow, hoping to keep some distance from Sylvia's piercing gaze. Yet to maintain civility, she paused. "It's a lovely estate you have," she offered. "We're grateful for Mr. Richardson's hospitality." Sylvia gave the barest hint of a smile, the corners of her mouth twitching. "It's our family home," she replied. "Some of us have devoted considerable time and energy ensuring it remains a place of dignity." Nina caught the subtle barb. Sylvia was effectively reminding her that she was an outsider. Before Nina could respond, Grant suggested a change of topic, motioning for them to join him at a table set with sandwiches and fruit. Throughout the meal, Sylvia asked pointed questions about Nina's background, her work, and how she was managing on her own. Nina did her best to remain polite, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was being interrogated. After lunch, Sylvia excused herself, claiming business matters to attend to. Grant apologized once she was gone, rubbing his temples as though staving off a headache. "My sister means well," he explained, "but she's protective of me. Sometimes overly so." Nina nodded, though she was unconvinced. She recalled Ingrid's warnings. Perhaps Sylvia's protectiveness was more about controlling the estate's narrative and resources. If so, Nina needed to tread carefully, especially now that Trevor's reappearance threatened to stir up trouble. Days turned into weeks, and Nina found herself juggling her cleaning jobs, visits to the estate, and the stress of awaiting Trevor's next move. Each time she arrived at the Richardson estate, Ingrid would greet her with a friendly nod or a whispered update. Sylvia was in a mood, or Grant was in the study, or a reminder that certain parts of the mansion were under renovation. Nina often wondered if Ingrid was quietly guiding her through potential landmines. For all her composure, Ingrid seemed invested in Nina and Kara's well-being, and Nina appreciated the silent support more than words could convey. Grant, on the other hand, oscillated between openness and distance. Some afternoons he'd talk animatedly with Kara about her favorite school subjects, or teach her small facts about the flowers in the garden, the way bees pollinated them, or how to recognize the songs of different bird species. The childlike excitement that flickered in his eyes at these times told Nina everything. He was relishing a moment of familial warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. On other days, Grant would be withdrawn, especially if Sylvia had cornered him for long conversations in his office. Nina suspected these were family business discussions, though she knew better than to pry. One crisp afternoon, while strolling through the garden with Ingrid, Nina finally inquired about Grant's past in more detail. Ingrid sighed heavily, resting one hand on a rosebush as though needing its support. "I've served this household for years," the housekeeper began softly. "Mr. Richardson used to be so full of life. His daughter Elena was the heartbeat of this place. She played in every corner of the garden, always laughing, climbing trees and picking flowers for the staff. Then, everything changed when Elena passed away." Ingrid's eyes grew moist. Nina gently touched the woman's arm, urging her to continue. Ingrid explained that Elena's mother left soon after, consumed by grief and guilt. Grant had become reclusive, burying himself in work, battling silent torment. Sylvia stepped in to handle many family affairs, forging a reputation as a tough, business-minded individual who occasionally took her control too far. A wave of empathy swelled in Nina's chest. She pictured Grant's gentle interactions with Kara. Clearly, the shadow of losing Elena still clung to him. Nina also saw how Sylvia's imposing presence might have grown from heartbreak, fear, or guilt about failing to protect Elena. It wasn't an excuse for Sylvia's coldness, but it offered context. Nina realized that stepping into this environment meant dealing with a tapestry of grief and power struggles, and she was no stranger to struggle herself. Since Trevor left, Nina's entire life had been about survival and caring for Kara. She too had learned that heartbreak could push people to do things they'd never have imagined otherwise. Ingrid's story left Nina contemplative. She recalled her last tense meeting with Sylvia, the veiled barbs and suspicious questions. Nina sensed Sylvia had labeled her as some opportunist, or perhaps an emotional crutch for Grant that threatened Sylvia's influence. Nina wanted to step away from the drama, but she couldn't deny that she was drawn to helping Grant, both for Kara's sake and because she saw glimmers of a good man behind the sorrow. As they returned to the mansion, Ingrid mentioned in passing, "You and Kara have been a breath of fresh air here. I see Mr. Richardson smile more, and that's worth a great deal." Nina offered a small nod and a polite smile, unsure of what else to say. Underneath her growing fondness for Grant and his estate, she felt a tightening apprehension about how Trevor might use this knowledge, and how Sylvia might react if she suspected Nina's presence threatened her grip on her brother's life. Trevor struck like a storm on a late afternoon when Nina thought she'd have a peaceful moment. It had been several weeks since his first reappearance, and he'd left only a few cryptic messages on Nina's phone, voicemails she deleted without responding. She hoped he'd lost interest, that maybe he'd found another target for his manipulative tactics. But Trevor was as cunning as ever, and his sense of timing had always been impeccable when it came to causing turmoil. That day, Nina was at the Richardson estate, helping Ingrid arrange fresh flowers in the foyer. Kara was out in the garden, presumably with Grant. The sun had just begun its descent, casting golden beams through the tall windows. Suddenly, the heavy doors burst open, and Trevor marched in as though he owned the place. Ingrid, startled, nearly dropped the vase she was holding. Nina froze, heart pounding. "Trevor," she hissed, stepping forward to intercept him. "How dare you barge in here?" Trevor's gaze flicked around, taking in the grandeur with obvious greed. "So this is the famous estate," he sneered, ignoring Ingrid, who stood tensely at the side. "I figured I'd pay a visit since I'm sure your friend can spare a few minutes for Kara's father." Nina fought the urge to push him out physically, but knew it would create a scene. "You need to leave," she insisted, voice shaking. "You have no business here." Just then, footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Grant appeared, accompanied by Kara. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Trevor, who regarded him with a smirk. "You must be Grant Richardson," Trevor said breezily, offering a hand that Grant did not take. "I'm Trevor Morales. I believe I have a right to see what's going on with my family." Kara, pressing close to Nina, looked up in confusion. She recognized her father only from old photographs and half-remembered glimpses of a man leaving when she was too young to understand. Grant's gaze slipped to Nina, who was pale and trembling with anger. Then he glanced at Kara, gently placing a hand on her shoulder to reassure her. "I wasn't aware you were in contact with Kara," Grant said carefully, his voice betraying the wariness he felt. Trevor let out a sarcastic laugh. "That's because Nina has done her best to keep me away. But I'm here now wanting to make amends. And from what I hear, you're the one providing them with a lifestyle far beyond what Nina could manage alone." He paused, letting the insinuation hang in the air. Nina snapped. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Grant's been nothing but kind to us." She turned to Grant, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Trevor is just trying to stir trouble. He left us years ago with no warning, and now he's back to cause chaos." Grant seemed to study Trevor for a long moment. "I won't have a confrontation in my home," he said firmly, stepping forward. "If you're here out of genuine concern for your daughter, we can talk privately. But if you've come to start a fight—" "Oh, no fight," Trevor cut in smoothly, his tone dripping with falseness. "Just want to make sure my daughter's well-being is secured. After all, if Nina's found herself a rich friend, maybe it's time to share the benefits more openly." His insinuation reeked of blackmail. Nina's stomach churned. She could almost feel Sylvia's presence in the walls, listening, ready to interpret the scene in the worst possible way. Ingrid, sensing the tension, ushered Kara out of the foyer with gentle persistence, leaving Nina and Grant to confront Trevor's venom alone. Grant's jaw tightened. He looked at Nina, then at Trevor, piecing together the dynamic. The protective glint in Grant's eyes told Nina that, despite their budding relationship being tested, he wouldn't easily allow Trevor to bully her or Kara. "We can speak in the study," Grant said coldly, leading the way. Nina followed close behind, heart hammering. She feared that Trevor might paint her as a manipulative gold digger in front of Grant, a fear that had haunted her from the moment she realized Trevor had returned. If Trevor succeeded in planting that seed, Nina was convinced Sylvia would eagerly use it to sabotage their fragile trust with Grant. Once inside the study, Trevor wasted no time. "I'm a simple man, Mr. Richardson," he began, leaning casually against the desk. "I see my ex-wife frequenting your estate, traveling in circles she's never known. We can come to an arrangement if you catch my drift. Some compensation to help me get back on my feet, in exchange for leaving her, and you, free from any paternal claims." Grant stared at him, the color draining from his face. Nina's body trembled with indignation at Trevor's gall. She was about to speak when Grant raised a hand, signaling her to let him handle it. "Are you suggesting I pay you to abandon your daughter?" Grant's voice was low, laced with disgust. Trevor shrugged, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Call it a settlement. Nina's clearly moved on, and I've been absent, but I have rights, unless, of course, I'm compensated to relinquish them." Nina couldn't contain herself anymore. "How dare you? Kara isn't a bargaining chip. You lost any right to call yourself a father when you walked out without a word, Trevor." Trevor turned to her, anger flashing. "You think I don't know you've been playing the perfect little mother, looking for some rich savior to solve your problems? Don't act so high and mighty, Nina. Everyone wants a slice of the pie, and yours just came with an estate attached." Nina felt tears threaten, a swell of fury and pain at the accusation that she was using Grant. She opened her mouth to deny it, but a quiet voice spoke first. "Trevor," Grant said, stepping closer, I'm sorry for whatever hardships you faced, but you've misunderstood the situation entirely. Nina and Kara haven't taken a dime from me. Their only involvement here is honesty and kindness, something you seem to be lacking." Trevor scoffed, crossing his arms as though unimpressed. "So you say. But if that's the case, you won't mind me coming around, being part of my daughter's life. Maybe I'll take Kara to the park or to your fancy garden. She might just let slip some interesting details about how well you're treating them." Nina's stomach clenched in dread. She wanted to keep Trevor as far away from Kara as possible, yet she also knew that denying him outright could backfire if he decided to pursue legal avenues, or if he managed to sow further doubts in Grant's mind. At that moment, the study door swung open, and Sylvia stepped in, her posture rigid. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her gaze flicking from Trevor to Grant to Nina. "I heard raised voices." Grant turned to his sister, a grin set to his features. "Sylvia, perhaps you should let us finish this conversation privately." But Trevor seized the moment, stepping forward. "Ah, so you're the sister. Good. Let me introduce myself. I'm Trevor Morales, Kara's father. I was just making it clear that if your brother wants to keep Nina and her daughter around, I have certain concerns." Sylvia's eyes narrowed, betraying her instant dislike for Trevor. Yet Nina sensed Sylvia's suspicion also extended toward Nina, as if the presence of two unscrupulous people in the estate, one known as a deadbeat dad, the other a single mother of questionable background, was a worst-case scenario. What followed was an explosion of tension that nearly tore the precarious peace to shreds. Sylvia insisted on hearing everything Trevor had to say, while Grant tried to shield Nina from Trevor's verbal jabs. Nina stood her ground, reasserting that she wanted nothing from Trevor except his absence, if he couldn't behave responsibly. The confrontation left everyone's nerves frayed. In the aftermath, Trevor stormed out, promising he'd return with or without an invitation. His parting words echoed ominously in the corridor. Sylvia, bristling with anger and mistrust, whirled on Nina the moment Trevor disappeared through the front doors. "This is exactly the kind of scandal I was worried about," Sylvia snapped, her well-manicured nails clenching the back of a leather chair. "Grant, can't you see how this entire situation jeopardizes our family's reputation? We're hosting a woman with a manipulative ex-husband who has no qualms about blackmail. For all we know, she's part of it." "Stop it, Sylvia," Grant warned, his voice strained. "Nina has done nothing but return my wallet and show compassion. She has no control over what her ex-husband does. We don't even know how he found his way here." Sylvia let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, don't be naive. Men like Trevor don't appear out of thin air. He has to have known enough details about Nina's connection to you. And who do you think supplied him with that information?" Nina's heart sank at the insinuation. Could it be Ingrid who mentioned something inadvertently, or had Trevor learned from local gossip? Nina's name had circulated among neighbors. Someone might have spotted the estate's car dropping her off once or seen her traveling to that posh neighborhood. The possibilities were endless. Ignoring Nina's downcast gaze, Sylvia pressed on. "Grant, I'm only trying to protect you. First, you lost Elena." She bit her lip, emotion warring with her stern composure. "And I won't stand by while you let strangers into your life who bring trouble. We can't risk letting your heart get broken again, or have the estate embroiled in scandal because a man like Trevor decides he can exploit us." Grant's face fell at the mention of his daughter's name, but he squared his shoulders. "Sylvia, that's enough. You're my sister, not my keeper. I value your concern, but Nina and Kara are not the enemy here." Sylvia's eyes blazed, but she swallowed whatever retort she had, pivoting sharply on her heels and striding from the study. Her footsteps echoed ominously in the hallway until they faded. Nina blinked back tears, feeling as though she and Kara had become the eye of a storm, battered from all sides. She quietly thanked Grant for his defense, but insisted, "Maybe it's best if Kara and I don't come here for a while. We don't want to cause more conflict." Grant turned to her, pained. "But you're not causing it. Trevor is. Sylvia is. You and Kara have been the bright spot in this house. Don't let them push you away." Nina appreciated his words, but she couldn't ignore the potential harm. She had to consider Kara's safety and emotional well-being first. If Trevor was going to use the mansion as a battleground, Nina wanted no part of it. She excused herself, found Kara with Ingrid in the garden, and left the estate, uncertain if she'd ever return. In the days that followed, Nina wrestled with heartbreak and guilt. She and Kara stayed away from the Richardson estate, hoping that distance might quench Trevor's interest in stirring up trouble. Yet each morning, Nina woke with a deep sense of loss, missing the peaceful garden, the fatherly presence Grant had shown Kara, and the subtle warmth she'd begun to feel in Grant's company. Kara asked repeatedly, "Why aren't we visiting Grant? Did I do something wrong?" Each time Nina had to reassure her that none of it was her fault, while masking her own sadness. News of Trevor's intrusion apparently spread among the staff. Ingrid texted Nina updates, though they were cryptic, likely to avoid detection by Sylvia. One message read, "Sylvia is furious. Grant is on edge. He misses you too. Wish I could help more." Another said, "Trevor hasn't come back, but Sylvia is hiring more security. Tension's high." Nina felt gratitude for Ingrid's concern, but it did little to alleviate the pit in her stomach. Working her cleaning jobs, Nina drifted through tasks mechanically, lost in a fog of what-ifs. What if she had confronted Trevor more aggressively before he invaded the estate? What if she had told Grant the entire history with Trevor from the start? Perhaps it wouldn't have changed anything, but the regret still gnawed at her. Kara, still attending her modest public school, yearned for the estate's grand garden. She drew pictures in crayon, replicating the rose bushes and fountains as best she could. Each new drawing served as a heartbreakingly innocent question. When can we go back? Nina had no easy answers. She was sure that as long as Trevor remained a threat, any attempt to reconnect with Grant would endanger them both emotionally and practically. Trevor could reemerge, demanding money or leveraging blackmail against Grant, especially now that Sylvia's suspicions were at a boil. Amid this turmoil, Nina tried to find a semblance of normalcy. She cooked simple dinners for Kara, read bedtime stories, and in the quiet moments after her daughter fell asleep, stared out the window at the flickering city lights, remembering the hush of Grant's study and the graceful arc of the garden paths. She told herself that stepping away was the only responsible choice. Grant was a grown man, with resources to defend himself. She and Kara had no business complicating that. Yet the heartbreak lingered, a dull ache that whispered how much she had come to care for him and how deeply it pained her to see him suffering under the weight of familial obligations. One afternoon, after nearly a week of silence, Nina's phone rang while she was scrubbing a client's bathroom sink. She glanced at the screen, her hands still soapy. Ingrid's number flashed, sending a jolt through her. She hurried to rinse off and answer. Ingrid's voice, low and urgent, poured out in a rush. "Nina, you need to come. Grant hasn't been himself. He's locked himself in his study for days, skipping meals. Sylvia is pushing him to finalize some business deal. I don't think he can cope with the pressure alone. Please." Nina felt her heart clamp painfully. Ingrid, I don't want to make things worse. Sylvia. Ingrid's voice trembled, near tears. "Let me worry about Sylvia. Grant needs you, needs Kara. He's sinking deeper into whatever guilt and grief he's carried for years." Nina pressed a hand to her forehead, emotions swirling. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll finish work early and come by." She hung up, mind reeling. Though fear of Trevor still shadowed her thoughts, the idea of Grant spiraling into despair propelled her to act. Kara, who had overheard fragments of the conversation, looked up with wide eyes. "Are we going to see Grant?" Nina nodded slowly, not entirely certain what they would find upon arrival. Leaving her work unfinished, Nina grabbed Kara and rushed to the Richardson estate. This time the gates swung open without delay, as if Ingrid was manning the controls, aware of the urgency. They found Ingrid waiting in the foyer, wringing her hands. "He's upstairs," she said, glancing worriedly over her shoulder. "Sylvia's in the study too, but they've been arguing. I think she's pressed him to sign some documents for a major investment, and Grant's been resisting." Nina led Kara toward the staircase, but halfway up, Sylvia emerged from the study, nearly colliding with them on the landing. "What are you doing here?" Sylvia hissed, eyes darting from Nina to Kara. "I called them," Ingrid said bravely, stepping in. "Mr. Richardson is not well." Sylvia's face contorted with fury. "You had no right. You're violating his privacy. Betraying family business matters. You're fired, Ingrid. Pack your things. Ingrid's face fell, but she stood her ground. So be it. My loyalty is to Mr. Richardson's well-being. He needs help that you're not giving him. At that moment, they heard a crash inside the study, a glass shattering, followed by a low curse. Nina didn't hesitate. She pushed past Sylvia and opened the door. Inside, Grant stood with one hand braced on the massive desk, papers scattered across the floor. His hair was disheveled, eyes ringed with exhaustion. A broken whiskey glass lay in shards near his feet. "Grant," Nina said softly, stepping in, Kara trailing behind. "Are you okay?" He looked up as though startled to see them. His eyes flicked from Nina to Kara, a storm of emotions battling in his gaze: relief, guilt, sorrow, and something close to hope. Sylvia barged in behind them, her voice clipped. "He's fine. He just needs to finish signing these documents so the family business can move forward. This is not your affair." Grant's breath ragged. He turned to his sister. "I told you I need time," he rasped. "I can't keep making decisions like Elena's death never happened, like my life isn't still filled with questions." Sylvia's composure cracked. "Grant, we've been over this. You must move on. The business doesn't wait." Kara, frightened by the shouting, stepped forward with tear-filled eyes. "Don't yell at him," she said in a small voice. "He's hurting." Her simple statement sliced through the tension. Grant sank to one knee, pulling Kara into a gentle embrace. Over her shoulder, he looked at Nina with an expression that spoke volumes. He was exhausted, desperate for solace, grateful to see them. Nina moved closer, ignoring Sylvia's glare. "Grant, talk to me," she urged. He swallowed hard, voice quivering with frustration. "I can't do this alone anymore. I miss my daughter every day, and I let that grief swallow me. Sylvia tries to help, but it comes out as pressure to keep going like everything's normal." Nina placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to keep pretending, and you don't have to push people away." Turning to Sylvia, Nina mustered all her courage. "If you truly care about him, let him heal at his own pace. Stop trying to fix him by controlling everything. Let him find reasons to live again, reasons that might include me and Kara." Sylvia bristled, but she was silent. Perhaps she recognized an undeniable truth in Nina's words, or perhaps she was simply too tired to argue further. After a long moment, she exhaled sharply, tossed the contracts onto the desk, and marched out. Ingrid hovered in the doorway, waiting. Grant pressed his forehead against Kara's hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for doubting you, for letting Trevor's lies into my head, for not protecting you from this chaos." Nina gently lifted Kara away so Grant could stand. She noticed that his eyes shone with tears. "It's okay to be sad," Nina told him, "and it's okay to need help." She glanced at Ingrid in the doorway, then locked eyes with Grant. "Maybe it's time we all learned that leaning on each other doesn't make us weak." A profound hush settled in the study. The tension had ebbed, replaced by a tentative sense of relief. Outside, the setting sun cast warm orange light through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Kara clung to Grant's hand, her small fingers curled around his. Ingrid cleared her throat quietly, as if to say she was still there. Grant looked at each of them. His sister was gone, but Ingrid, Nina, and Kara remained. "Thank you," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. No more words were needed. Together they stepped out of the study, leaving the shattered glass behind, walking into the dusk of a new beginning, one in which a broken man, a devoted mother, and a hopeful child could dare to believe in a brighter tomorrow. Looking back, what began as an ordinary day for a mother and her little girl transformed into a journey of self-discovery, compassion, and second chances. Returning that lost wallet turned out to be more than a simple good deed. It became the cat,